Alright, so the main purpose of this assignment is what we want to do is create a mechanical door. And the goal of this is that we have something that looks, something floating there. We have something that looks like it very well could be a realistic door, and the locks and mechanisms that would be on here would be something that could actually be on a door. Now this is just part of it that I have here. If I zoom in and look at these latches, I actually have, oops, I have a plate, I have a hinge, and if I rotate the hinge out, you see how I have this other stuff here. And the way that this lock mechanism would work is that I would have this little half pipe kind of rotate like this, and then I can unlock, and then when it's locked, that's rotated downward. Okay, so I would have each of those kinds of things set up. I also have in this case these little bars that would come in and hold the door locked, and then when the door is unlocked, these bars would come up out of the way. And then I also have this little mechanism back here which kind of drives this entire thing. So this gear spins. Let me isolate my gears just so you can see what's happening with them. Okay, so this big gear spins, and it's going to turn this wheel. This wheel is going to turn that wheel, and that wheel would be linked up to this one, which would actually turn and rotate this or pull this outward. Okay, and then I have this one down here that would also be set up to rotate this one and then have both of those come out. Okay, and then I have some extra stuff that's out there. All right, so some of the stuff may not physically work. You know, you don't have to create every single step along the way of how this thing would work exactly. But the more stuff you have, obviously, the cooler it could look. Like, for instance, these bars dropping, how do we get the bars to drop in here? And then how do we get them to come back up? It could be some sort of piston-like mechanism that pushes the bars down. Or it could be something where they're held up by gravity or by a magnet, and then they just like release, and then the bars fall into place. And then when the magnet kicks back on, they get pulled back up. Okay, and then a similar thing here, there could be like an anti-gravity or an anti-magnet thing that pushes these bars up, and then when the anti-magnet's off, it pushes them back down. And obviously that would have to be a super strong magnet that would do something like that. Okay, or it could be any number of things that just push this thing to go straight up. Okay, the more stuff you have in there, the nicer, more realistic this is going to look. Okay, this little plate that's here, I have this bar that just comes into it, into the center of it. And then the goal of it is that once these two bars have been removed, like that, all the way, like this, all the way, okay, then this thing would be free to rotate 90 degrees and then push in, and then the door would be able to be opened. Okay, so we're not actually going to animate these things. The goal is that we just get this thing kind of set up so that if we ever did want to animate this, we could do something like that and kind of showcase it. And you see I have a lot of gears that are right here, you know, and if this was the room, then obviously we wouldn't have these gears just like laying out here. Part of this is that there's hidden areas. Okay, so my door is right here, but I basically have something like a tunnel that would be like this. So you walk in, you see the door, you don't see all the gears, you don't see all the mechanism type things. All those are kind of like buried in these, you know, feet and feet of concrete reinforced walls. Okay, so I'm gonna save this, and then we're gonna go to a new scene. Okay, so your first step in this is just to create what the door is gonna look like. So File, Project Window, let's make a project, hit New, put it in the 2520 work folder, Mac Door Sarcona, and I'll call it 2 because I already have one named that. And then we're just going to create what the door is going to look like. Okay, so I'm going to start from a plane and move from there. Now I'm going to actually take my scale up on this. So I'm going to make it like 20, just so it's big enough. Rotate that 90 degrees. Take my divisions down. Okay, and I'm going to get the proportions first. You know, what's the width of the entire doorway? Not just a single door, but what's the width of the entire doorway? And I'll also move this up 12. Oops. There we go, half of 12.669. There we go. I just like to have it sitting on the ground. Alright, so let's say that's the width of my door. And obviously I could tweak it if I wanted. One thing that I think really helps any modeling you do is to create stuff that looks realistic. So let's say I want to cut these corners here. If I added another division, let's say like that and like that, I could come in here and just go, you know, grab this thing and go like this and kind of eyeball what this thing is going to look like. But I think it really helps if you get it exact, you know, an actual 45-degree angle. So what I'm going to do, let me just do that, is I'm going to extrude this. I could have used a cube, obviously, but sometimes it's nice to start from a plane. And then I can grab this edge here, shift-click that edge, shift-click this edge, shift-click that edge, and I can go to Mesh Bevel. Oops. Mesh, or Edit Mesh Bevel. Okay, so that's pretty much, that's a 45. And I can adjust that angle there. So I think 0.3 looks kind of neat. Okay, so I've just cut that kind of in half. Now let's say I couldn't do a bevel on it, or I didn't want to do a specific bevel. What I can do is I can create a polygon cube. A plane would work too. And then what I would do is take this cube, leave it proportionate, so it's perfectly a cube, every side is evenly sized. Grab one of the edges, like this one, and then just hold down V and snap it to that. Okay? Now even though they're on top of each other, who cares? I'm not going to model or render this thing. This is simply a placeholder for a 45-degree angle template. Okay? Hold down D and V, move my pivot down here. And then now you see that I have this this little template. So I could use in my front view, I could just snap it right to the grid, scale it up, and then I can use point snap to snap my points perfectly in line with that if I needed to. Okay? So you can use things like this to kind of help you create those 45-degree angles if you needed it. Okay, so there's our door. I'm going to make it a bit thick. Okay, I'm going to cut it in half down the middle. If I go to Insert Edge Loop, it's not going to work. Okay, it'll work there, but that's it. So I need to use a different tool. I'm going to use the Cut Faces tool. Still under Edit Mesh, still in the same area. Here's Cut Faces. I'm going to go to the front view, and I'm just going to click. It's going to give me this little angle. I'm going to hold Shift to constrain it straight and let go. Okay, there's my bar. Then I'm going to go to the Polycut options and just reset the X direction. Okay, what it's doing is it'll project it along certain directions. So if I set the X was 2, you can see how I moved that bar over to 2. Set it to 0, it's right at the origin, cut in half. Okay, and because we don't need to model both halves of this, we can just model one. I can just delete the faces here. Okay, focus my efforts here, and then I don't have to worry about it. Also, I'm going to need to take this. You see this is open. I want that closed. So I can go to Mesh, Fill Hole, and that will fill that hole in. Okay. We also want to keep, in this case, we want to keep a low amount of divisions. I don't want to just start adding a bunch of divisions in here just to add them. When we are done rendering this, we're going to have a wireframe. And the more divisions we have, the more cluttered it's going to look, and the uglier that wireframe rendering is going to look. Okay, so now I can just go in here and you know, estimate what do I want this door to look like, where do I want some details to be. Okay, so I'm going to add in some manual details here. So I'm going to grab the two faces, okay, front and back. I'm going to go to Edit Mesh. I'm going to say extrude, and I'm going to take let's take the thickness, oops, not thickness, sorry, offset. Let's take offset in, okay? And the reason we take offset in instead of scaling is that if we click the scale and we scale this down, we may not get proportionate features, okay? So we should always use the offset command when we're trying to get something like this. So I think 1 is probably going to be good. Okay. Then I'm going to extrude it again. Okay. At this point, I'm going to push it in, and then I'm going to add a little bit of offset. Okay, so we kind of have that shape. Okay, so it looks mechanical, metallic type door. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is add some extra details into this. I want to create these little latches that go over this. Okay, eventually I'll create those. But I know I need to have enough room. So I have to make sure that the room that I have right here, and those faces, and this face right here, is going to support having those latches. And I think we're good. If it wasn't good, I could take these points and scoot them over. And even though we have more room here than we do there and around here, that's fine because this is our main holding area of the door. Okay. And if I look at my front view, I can see that everything is still at good angles. Everything is still nice and straight. That's what we want. Okay. All right. So there's the basic model of my door. I can add other stuff inside here too. I think that's good for now. I'm going to delete the history, and I'm going to duplicate it and just negative scale it in the X direction. Whichever direction will flip me over that axis is what I want. Okay, so if it wasn't X, I could go to Y or Z, but just looking at my scale manipulator, red was the direction that would take me over. So that's why I used X. Okay, so I want to do a little cutout right here in the middle. I want to have, a big hole right there. Now in the past I've said, don't use booleans, it's the devil of tools. Well, in this case we're going to use booleans. And there are certain cases where booleans is very effective. Rotate this, the X. But like everything in Maya, we want to keep our polygon counts low. Okay, so I'm just going to make that 16. I think was going to be good. And take my caps off. Okay, and that's a good size right here. So I'm going to duplicate this and scoot it up, because that's going to be the shape that I'm going to use to fill that in. Okay, now this is still going to be like templated. I'm not going to actually use this. I just wanted to see how it's looking with these two doors together. I like the way they look, so I can delete it. So I'm going to grab this door because I want to keep the door. I'm going to shift click this thing because I want to remove that thing. And I think I actually want to scoot it in a little bit more. There we go. So click the door, shift click the little piece. I can see that the little piece is sticking out. I go to mesh, I go to booleans, and I go to difference. Okay. Now this is one of the sucky things about the Maya booleans tool, is that difference is supposed to cut that shape out. It obviously did not cut the shape out. If I go on the inside of the door, you can see that it cut it out here, but it didn't cut it out on the other side. So not a big deal. Let's go to the bool options here and change it from difference to union. And for whatever reason, that seems to work. Okay, difference should have worked, but in this case, it wanted union. Okay, now looking at this, you can see the amount of divisions we have here and the amount of divisions we have here. That's directly related to the amount of divisions of that shape. If this shape had 40 billion divisions going all over it like crazy, then we would have 40 billion divisions all around this going like crazy. Okay. So there's our little cutout. And we can add a bevel to this if we needed to. Just so you can see it. I'm going to undo it because I don't want the bevel on it right now. If I decide later I'll put a bevel, then I'll put a bevel later. Okay. So I have that. Edit mesh bevel. And you can see that the bevel indeed works. Okay. Now what I can't do on this shape, obviously, is hit 3 because it just turns into that kind of shape. Okay. So this is, whenever you use booleans, it's going to be one of those shapes where you're just going to keep it exactly like it looks like in one. Alright, so let me undo my bevel, and if I decide to add that later, I'll add it later. Okay, I'm keeping everything low right now. Alright, so there's our thing, and then this guy's going to be coming in. Okay, I'm going to scale him down a touch. There we go. And he's going to be kind of like this little mechanism that's going to push in. So I'm going to extrude. Because I have a perfect circle, I can just scale it out. So something like that. Okay, I'll even take this side, this face here, I'll push that out a little bit. Okay, so that the process of, the door working is that it would rotate and then lock into position. Let me push that back in again. I think I'm going to need to have these parts come out a little bit further. So let me just grab their vertices. And this is part of the stuff that we want to do in overcome these kinds of little challenges, is to make sure that everything is could be animated correctly. Okay, it may not be physically accurate in the real world, but it could be animated to make it look like it's something that could happen. There we go. So still a little gap there, that's fine, we can have a little gap there. Alright, good. Okay, so now I want to do a little cutout in the middle of this, so I can just create polygon cube. And I want to get it perfectly centered, so I'm going to hold down shift and click that. So I have the cube selected first, I shift click that, modify, snap align objects, midpoints of X, Y, and Z, and align it to the last selected object. So that just puts my cube right at the center of that thing. So then I can scale it down, and this is going to be in the unlocked, or in the unlock position is vertical, like this. The lock position is going to be flat. Okay, so I'm doing this in the unlocked, or in the lock position. So I'm going to click this because I want to keep it. I'm going to shift click that and say mesh booleans difference. And you can see how we have a nice little cutout right there. And again, we can't hit 3 because it makes it funky. Alright, again, we could add bevels if we needed to, but I don't need to. Now when you create a booleans, just so we can see it, it keeps the stuff around. These two little things here are the original cylinders I used to create this shape. This P-plane is the original one I had for my door. This P-cube is the original one I used to cut out this shape. So with history not deleted yet, I still can go in here and edit this shape. Okay, so I'm editing my booleans right now. If I go this way, look at that, we have a screw. Okay, so it won't actually get rid of these things until we delete history. So once I grab these two pieces, you can see those two pieces, delete the history, then those other things go away. Now I can't edit that boolean shape. Okay, I can still come in here and grab the face and move the face manually, or grab the entire thing and I can scale it up. Okay, but I can't do, I can't get that screw shape back because of where I'm at. Okay, so just so you're aware of the limitations and what we would have to do to work around that. Alright, so I'm going to take this guy, I'm just going to throw him on a layer right now just to get him out of the way. Okay, so now that I have this, I'm going to go and create the exterior of this. Alright, so I'm going to duplicate this, I'm going to isolate it, and then I'm going to delete everything that I don't want in here. This is the wall that I'm creating, so I'm just deleting all these. I'm going to extrude this, so I don't need all these other pieces. I don't even really need that piece. Okay, so there's my door. So I'm going to extrude. And I'm going to use thickness here. Oops, negative. There we go. Just to kind of pull it off the surface. And then I can go into my vertices and physically move this stuff. So I'm going to move this one up, holding down V to snap it in alignment with these points, and then move it over. I'm going to take this guy, let me go in the front view so we can see this better. I'm going to snap him vertically, so I hold V, click the up arrow, it snaps there, pull that over. grab this, hold down V, snap it down, pull it over. Hold on V, snap it this way. Yeah, I'll just add another division for that. That's good there. Okay. All right, so I'm going to take all these, hold X, and snap them in alignment. If it doesn't line up, I'm going to hold down W and click, and then just make sure that keep spacing is off. Now hold down X, and now we've flattened out. Okay. So then I can just go into insert edge loop, insert an edge loop right here, and then just grab this vertice and snap it there and snap it there. Okay. So now I have this wall that's a perfect wall. Okay. And if I unisolate select, you can see my door matches perfectly with my wall. Now I'm going to give my wall a little bit more thickness than the door. So it looks like it's kind of inset. It looks like I have a nice line there. As we start playing with this stuff, there we go. I want to make sure that my door can encapsulate, be encapsulated by the wall. As you start playing with stuff, it might be hard to see, you know, where does one surface start, where does another one end. So I'm going to click on this wireframe box right here. And now I can actually see where my stuff is at. Okay. So now that I can see this, the wall is basically going to be just like this is the wall kind of shape. Okay. I may go in here and modify the height of it. I think we can probably go a little bit higher. There we go. And I'm also looking at, because I'm going to be doing a wireframe rendering, I'm looking at what the wires are doing, because I want to make sure that those are going to look nice. Okay. So if I had some funky, let's just say I put a division here. If I had some funky division there, it's not doing anything. I want to make sure I go to Edit Mesh and say delete that edge to get rid of it. Okay. All right, so here's my door. I'm going to delete, or my wall. I'm going to delete this face right there. I'm going to go to Mesh. I'm going to say Mirror Geometry option box, and I'm going to mirror it into the positive X direction. Okay, you see how it flips it over, and if I go to Object Mode, hit 3, just so we can see it is attached. Okay. And again, we can put bevels and whatever else around here. I usually save that as kind of like a last minute thing, just because I don't want to overload my scene with other stuff. I'm also going to create a floor, so I'll create a plane. There we go. And just like before, we want to get rid of any unnecessary divisions. So I'll take my divisions on the plane down to 1 and 1. And I can hide my grid at this point. Okay. All right, so now I've created just a couple things in here that are just going to, you know, make it look a little bit nicer. Now I can go to the front view, and let me set up, you know, I want to have these bars kind of drop in like that. So I'm going to go to my polygons. I'm going to go to cylinder. I'm going to take my divisions down to 16. And I'm just randomly picking 16 as my number. I'm going to take my radius down to. You see, the nice thing about editing in here is that we don't have to worry about having random scales and whatever's over there. Okay, it still needs to come down a little bit. 5.4. I think that's going to be a good size to kind of get a couple guys in here. Okay, so now I need to look at, you know, if this is where this is going to come in on the door, I have to make sure it's going to fit on my actual door. Okay, without sticking out. You know, it can't be like this. It has to be fully in there. There we go. And I can click on the door. I can shift click this and do a snap align. And I'm going to look at just the Z direction. That's the only direction I care about. So just align the midpoints in Z. Okay. Now just so you can see what that did. Oops, other way. This one and that one. See how it moves it and it aligns it right in Z. That's what we want. Then I can go to the front view, duplicate, scoot it over, shifty, shifty, shifty. Do 5 of them, I guess. Okay, so now there's my bars. Now I want to have these bars as my drop-ins, right? So they just go drop into place. They're also going to be on the bottom, so I'll have some more come up here. So what I want to do is I'm going to duplicate these. These are the actual bars that are going to drop in. I'm going to duplicate these, and I'm going to scale it up slightly. So I'm just going to hold Control and drag on this green manipulator. That way it just kind of scales that out. Okay, so I'm just scaling it out slightly, just so the bars can drop in and have a little bit of wiggle room. And that's what we have. So let me go to the outliner. And here are these 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Those pieces there are my ones that I'm actually going to go through and cut into the surfaces. So I'm going to say Mesh Combine and delete the history. Okay. Now, this gives me one shape. Okay. They're all individual objects, but I can't grab them individually. And when we do our booleans, we only have to select one object instead of having to go through and do this 5 times, which sometimes Maya really, really doesn't like. Okay. So these are, I'm just going to call cutout bars. They'll be gone in a minute anyway. So now I need to cut it out of the door, and I need to cut it out of my wall here. Okay. So I need to have 2 copies of these. So I'm going to grab my cutout bars and duplicate them. And while I have this whole setup basically set up, I'm going to grab all of these things, duplicate it, and scoot it down to the bottom. Okay. And just making sure that it is definitely not intersecting or doing anything funky. Alright. So now if I look at cutout bars 1 here, cutout bars 2 here, both of these are going to intersect with the door. So I can actually go to Mesh Combine those and let that be one object that it kind of goes into the door. Okay. Now I also have to keep in mind, you know, how are these bars going to work? Let me delete the history on this so we can see this. If I grab these cylinders here, right now it's like in lock mode. Okay, there's nothing that, you know, these bars have nowhere really to go. They can't go here because we're cutting that out. So these bars would have to be shorter and then maybe get pushed up into this area. Okay, but they definitely need to be fitting so that they can fit under the surface like that and then shoot up and be locked in position. Okay, so here's where the game comes into it as to, you know, how big do we want the stuff to be. If I go to my cutout bars and I grab the vertices for it and just pull this down, well, now I have plenty of room for these things to fall down. Where I could just go, you know, now it's below the surface, now it's in the surface. Okay? So it really depends on what you want to do and how you want this thing to look as to how far you kind of move your stuff. Now I wouldn't want to have this probably drop below the surface like that. I think having it flush with the surface would be ideal. So maybe at this point, I could say, okay, that's where they're flush. Let me just grab those and scoot this up here. Oops, I scooted the wrong one. Scoot it right there. Okay, so now if I look at this, here they are underneath the ground. When they lock, they just kind of shoot up, and now they're in lock position. Okay, the ones that are on the door, I don't really care too much about. Okay, those ones. These are the ones that are on the door. As long as they go here, I'm happy with that. Okay, and let me just label these so I have these ones as floor cutout, because they can get confusing. And then this will be door cutout. Okay, so the same thing up here. The door ones look good, but the ceiling ones, I'm going to grab the vertices for this and just pull them up. Okay, basically as far as it's going to go into the door, I need to have that much room out here. So if I move this up, there we go, plenty of room. Cool. Okay. And this is where the game comes in, you know, making sure it's nice and could be something that would actually work. So I'm going to grab the door, or the wall. I'm going to shift click these, because that's my wall cutouts up here. And I'm going to say Mesh Booleans Difference. And again, it didn't do, let me go to isolate. It didn't do what I wanted. It actually like stuck them out. So I go back to my bool op, I change my difference. And I'm going to choose union. Sometimes it won't be, sometimes it'll be intersection. Okay? That's what difference should be doing, is cutting it through there. For whatever reason, it doesn't always work. Okay, so now I have my floor I want to cut these shapes out of. So I grab the floor, shift click the things, mesh booleans difference. Now we have some cutouts there. Now I can do the door ones. So I grab the door, shift click those pieces, mesh booleans difference. And again, didn't work, so then we go back to union, and that seems to work for whatever reason. Okay, so now let me grab this and delete the history. Okay, let me grab the bars that are here. Okay, I'm going to group those and just call those upper bars. Group those. And you want to label your stuff, because if this is going to be something that will be animated, the animator needs to find this stuff real quick. Okay? They can't be, you know, what surface is that? I don't even know what this stuff is called. All right? And the only reason I haven't really labeled the door yet is because if I cut more stuff out of the door, it's going to relabel this anyway. Okay? And the same thing with the floor. You can see that it relabeled the floor, which was just polyplane, into polysurface. But I think I'm done with the floor. So I can call this floor. And this is my wall. I don't think I'm done with that yet. This is that little piece there. So I can call this center button. Button. And then that's just my cube 45 degree. Okay. All right. So now we have this so that we can keep trucking along. Alright, so on this thing, one of the other elements I want to have to this is that there's a bar that kind of scoots in to the middle here. Okay, so I'm going to grab a cylinder and I'm rotating it 90 degrees. I'm thinning it out, so I go to my radius. And that looks like it's a good width. Okay, and this is going to fit right inside of this thing here. Okay, so I want to make sure that it fits and doesn't intersect the back of this. Maybe a little bit more radius will work. There we go. 0.15 seems to be a good value. Okay, so I'm just going to scale this up. And what's going to happen is this is going to be a bar. I'm going to make it bigger. And this bar would just kind of shoot out from the wall. Like that. Now I'm not going past where this would be going out because there'd be other stuff over here. Okay, and I don't want this to be too short, you know, and just barely hit it, because then it's not really going to give a whole lot of support on this side. So I want to make sure that this bar is nice and big. So there it's fully engaged, and then here's where it's past the door, it's not fully engaged. Okay, so that's where that's going to go. And again, I need to cut this stuff out. Okay, so I'm going to go and duplicate this. And I duplicated it 2 times. I need to cut out the wall. And I need to cut it out of here. Okay, so the one that I cut out of here, I know I'm going to do it on both sides, so I'm just going to make that bigger. The one I'm going to cut out of the wall, I'm going to cut out of both sides of the wall, so I'm just going to make that bigger. Okay, and I'm actually just going to make sure it goes straight through like that. Alright, so I'm going to grab the wall, shift click this guy, mesh, booleans, difference. Okay, again, whatever reason doesn't work, change it to union, and whammo bammo. I think I should just start going to union right off the bat and save myself the clicking. Click this, shift click that, mesh, booleans, union, and of course it's going to do exactly what union would do, so let's change it to difference. There we go. I think Maya just knows what I want, and then it just gives me the opposite. Okay, so then I can take my scale of this guy and just scale it down slightly, just so it would actually fit in there. If it's the exact size, there's no way it would fit. It would just kind of like break. All right. So that works. Okay, so now that can come in. Make sure in the front view that I'm good here. I want to leave a little bit of a gap between these two, like that. Okay, so I'm going to do a freeze transform on these, because that's where my starting or my closed position is. So I'm basically like, this is where it's locked. Then I'm going to put the pivot right here at the center. So I hold down D and V will work. And I just move this over until we're lined up. Okay, then I duplicate, negative scale it in the X direction, make sure I'm still good here. See how I have a little gap right there? And then I can just center pivot these things and call these opening bars. And I'll actually call this one right. Didn't name it. Right. Left. Okay. And then I have a couple poly surfaces. I'll delete those. And this is the button. I forgot. I named it, but you can see that it changed the name of it. Okay. All right. So we got the mechanism up here. These things dropping down. We have the bar kind of coming out from here and sticking into this. Okay. And that's preventing, let me center pivot this guy. It's preventing this from turning because the bar is right there. So it can't turn, and it has to turn and be pushed in order for that whole thing to work. Okay. So that's, this is a secure door. No one's getting in this thing. So now I'm going to do my latches, and I'm actually going to save my scene before this crashes. Oops, my mech door 01. Okay, and I'm also going to go through and just make sure my history is deleted and all my stuff. Okay, sometimes with Booleans it just acts funny, so you just want to, do your homework and or do your due diligence and delete history on lots of these things. All right, so now for my little mechanism here, I'm going to create a cube. I could easily do this out of a plane also, but I'll do it out of a cube. Okay, and get the sizing of this thing set up. So half of the latch is going to be on one side, the other half is going to be on the other side. Okay, so something like that. That looks like a good size. All right, so I can just go in and insert an edge loop. Grab this face, extrude it. There we go. So there's my little latch. I think I'm going to thin out this side. I think this needs to be just a little bit thinner, like that. Okay, then I'm going to add a little hinge to this. So before I add the hinge, I'm just going to create a cube. I put the pivot in the corner, snap that pivot here, oops, here. This is just the hinge plate, that's all it is. There we go, something like that. Okay, so I'm just going to put a cylinder between these two. Cylinder. Scale the cylinder down. You see how this time I didn't really go over here and play with these settings. I just really is based on just how I feel at the moment of whether I'm already in there and can use those or if I'm going to use them at all. Okay, so I'm lining this up so that this line here comes straight across. I can see I'm probably still a little bit low. I'm using this arrow as my guide because this arrow is lined up with that. Okay, so that should be good there. All right, so there's my hinge. Now I want to make it look like a hinge, so I'm going to take my divisions down, 16. I'm going to go insert edge loop, and I'm going to do multiple edge loops, 5. Okay, and that gives me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different divisions here. Okay, and actually I want 4. There we go. Okay, now these things should be, they don't have to be the exact same size, but I just need to make sure that they make more sense. So I'm just going to scale this guy down until he fits the cube shape a little bit better, like that. Okay. So then what I'm going to do is take these edges that are right in the middle, the ones I just created, like that, and I'm going to go to Edit Mesh Bevel and take my offset down, 0.05. Okay, and you can see what that did is it just gave me these 2 lines right there. So then I can grab the faces for those 2 lines, and I can extrude it. Oops. Push it in slightly, and then delete. Now the reason I deleted it is so I can do this. Mesh, separate. So now I have separate pieces. And I can grab every other one, go to Mesh, Combine. Grab these 2, Mesh, Combine. And now I have hinges for the plate here, and then I have hinges for this. Okay, so I can actually just grab these 2 and just say Mesh, Combine on there. Grab these 2 and say Mesh, Combine on there. Okay, so now if my pivot's in the right spot, which it isn't right now, it's actually way out here, I can just go and remove the pivot, DV, scoot it over until it gets closer to it. And you see that the pivot is basically, it's like right on one of these horizontal lines. So now I'm going to use this red one to scoot it over so that it's lined up with this vertical line. So now this is centered. So now as I rotate it, you can see how it rotates perfectly around that cylinder. So now, there it's open, there it's closed. Open, closed. Okay. And we could add some more detail to this thing too. We can go in here and grab a sphere. Actually, a cube. I did want a cube. Oops. No, I think a sphere will work. Oh. We can still use a cube, but just smooth it out. That's all I wanted, is something like this. Just a little bolt type thing on the edge of this. So I can just kind of pop these on this. I could also use a sphere, but I get different divisions on a sphere. There we go. So now this thing is super secure. It's actually too secure. It looks funky. I want these things to be tinier. There we go. That looks better. It looks more realistic having them that small. Okay. So now I can just take these things, and the only reason I'm combining all of these is because of how we're rendering this. Okay. Mesh, combine. If this was going to be a photorealistic rendering, I would not combine all of this stuff like that. I would just be grouping it correctly. Alright, so I'm going to take these 2, and these 2 I am going to group. This is going to be latch and center pivot. Okay. Now, this is just part of the latch. Obviously, it has to latch onto something. In this case, I'm going to do something a little bit different than what I had before. So I'm going to go to add another cube in here. I'm going to just get this lined up. And I'm going to try something a little different than my previous one. I'm going to add in, say, another edge loop. Oops. Make sure I go back to my insert edge loop options and reset it back to relative. And now I can grab the face and extrude the face out. Something like that. Okay, now this, if I were to try to rotate this, it's going to intersect. I don't want that. So this guy here is actually going to have a little plate that's attached to the door that allows him to slide back so that he can do that. Okay. So I'm just going to duplicate him, line it up with the plate here. Let me isolate these objects so I can see it better. There we go. Okay, so he's going to be on this plate. That plate needs to be a little bit thicker. There we go. So now we're locked in. Okay, and then when this door unlocks, this is going to go, and then this thing can open up. Scoot that over a little bit more. Let me scoot this over a little bit more. Just like how close the cube was to the rest of that. Okay, so that looks kind of neat. Just to kind of sell the idea of this thing working, I'm going to duplicate this, scale it down like that, and then just do a mesh booleans difference. Oops, you see it disappeared because I'm in isolate select mode. Turn that off, and I get a little cutout right here. That's what I want. Okay, I didn't put the actual piece on the other side because you never actually see that, but now it kind of looks like this could physically slide. All right, that looks cool. So now let me grab everything here, delete the history on it. I'm just going to add these last two objects into the latch group, and then just make sure I rename these things. So there's my hinge plate. This is my actual hinge. Sliding mech. And I can develop these even further. I'm not going to at this point. Sliding mech plate. Okay. Alright, so now I have a latch. It looks good. I'm going to just put the pivot for the latch. Let's look at this for a second. If we had this latch actually on here, you can see that yes, this would work. We can take this and rotate it, and take this and slide it. But one thing I didn't consider when I was building this initially is that this thing is not going to be flush. Okay, and what I mean by that is if I take this over to my door, and I say, okay, let me line up the plate so it's actually on the door. There it is. You can see where this thing is going to be hitting inside the area. Okay, so I could make a decision at this point and say, okay, well, what do I want to do? Do I want to build this thing out further so the plate's thicker so it'll hit this area more? Okay, so I could just pull this out until that makes sense, and then I can grab, you know, this face here and extrude this and pull it out. Okay, because I could have something like that that could work. Okay, the other thing I can do is on the other door, I could just kind of knock in an area. That way I have kind of like a little cavity inside there. So it's really just dealer's choice what I want to do. So I think I'm going to do the knock-in cavity just to add a little bit more detail. Okay, and now these plates are going to be, there's going to be several of them. So I'm going to duplicate this one, and I'm going to scoot it up to here. I'm going to duplicate this one, I'm going to rotate it. Come on. That far. Scoot it up to there, duplicate it, and scoot that one down to here. Okay, so I'm just going to look and see, are these, level? Do they make sense? I can't kind of go back after the fact and change any of this stuff. I can minimally, but not a whole lot. Okay, and I think it's probably going to help me if I just create some cubes. And I'm just going to use these as placeholders and say, okay, here's where my thing is there. I'm going to duplicate, scoot it down. Oops. Okay, so I'm just going to grab these cubes. Actually, I'm going to grab this cube, and that. And I'm just going to go to Modify, Snap Align, Align Objects. And I'm going to use a Distribute in the Y direction. So this middle one, I should just kind of align that one. Okay? I don't think I like that. I don't like where it's positioning it. I'm just going to eyeball it. Sometimes you just have to eyeball where these things are looking and see, okay, if I look at this, I'm barely underneath that thing. So this guy should be barely above, and he's not. He's actually too far down. There you go. It's better. Okay, so that looks good. All right, so now my, oops, I never realigned these. Let me just grab all my groups again. When I was messing with it, I never undid far enough to go back to where I had these things touching the ground, or touching the door. I'm just going to move it in until we have contact with the door, which I think is about there. Yes, we're good right here. It's touching the door. That's what we want. Okay, so now what I'm going to need to do is cut holes into the door. So at this point, this left door is going to be different than the right door. So I need to duplicate my right door, negative scale it, so that I can get that. And then as I do that, I can see, okay, well now I'm actually a little bit off center. I need to just make sure that these things are moved over the correct distance. And if I realize I need to scale stuff down, then guess what? I scale it down. Now's the time to be doing all that stuff before I start doing any booleans and cutting stuff out. Okay, so that looks good there. It looks like I have something here, and if this latch is open, the door is going to be open. Okay, and these aren't going to come out that far. They're actually just going to come out, and then once the door starts opening, they're going to slide back in there. Okay, because I can't have it out here and then have this door slide into the wall. That wouldn't make sense. Okay, so now let me go and make a little pocket for these. So I'm going to create a cube. I'm going to shift click. Let's say I shift click one of these pieces in here. And then I just do a snap align to the midpoints, X, Y, and Z, last selected object. So it gets it over there. Then I can go in the front view and just kind of manually tweak where I want this to be. Okay, so something like that. Okay, I'm giving it enough room. And what I'm also going to do, I'm just going to fancy it up a little bit. Okay, we're looking at something, let me get the depth of this. Okay, so I'm good here. I have a good depth. I can always pull this other part in more. There we go. Okay, so now, like I said, I'm just going to make it a little bit fancier. I'm going to model this side of it. So I'm going to say edit mesh. Oops, let me grab all of these. Okay, not the front one. Edit mesh bevel. Okay, and you see how I made it a little bit fancy. It actually did the whole thing. Doesn't matter. I just want to make sure that this front part is further out, like that. Okay, so now what's going to happen is it's just going to cut out, and it's going to look like, it's kind of hard to imagine, but it's going to look like a little wedge area. Okay, so I'm going to duplicate, scoot this up here to that guy. I can use, if I zoom in on this, I can see where these blue lines and the green lines are. I can use that as my way to line this stuff up. Then duplicate, scoot this over to this side. And I can use this again, this left edge here, I'm using that to line up that thing. Duplicate, scoot it down to this one. You want to be very careful when you line these up, because if you don't line them up in the right spot, it can be very tricky to have to go back and do that. Okay, and let me just double check these and make sure that it's in the same relative spot. And it's not. I want to scoot that over a little bit more. Let's scoot this guy over a little bit more. Okay. Alright, so now again I can grab these two because they're in the same, going to be cut out of the same door, and do a combine. And delete the history. Then I can just grab the door, shift click that, mesh, booleans difference, and switch it to union. There we go. And so now we have a little cutout right there. So now we can see that this thing would just slide over, and that would allow that to come out. Okay, so we'll do the same thing on the other side. Grab those, mesh, combine, delete the history, grab the door, shift click that, mesh, booleans difference, and switch difference to union. Okay, so now I have my latches, I have my things, I have the bar. Let's save this as version 2. That way, in case we decide we want to get the door back, we can always go into our previous version and get the door back. Okay, let me isolate this for a second. I want to see. Okay, I don't have a division going down here. I'm going to need a division going down there because that's where the door is going to be sliding into. Okay, now it's going to be a little tricky to do that because I have this booleans that's already here. So I may have to go into my top view and use the cut faces tool in order to do that. Okay, so I'm just going to cut right there, and then I can move these into position. Okay. Oops. And I actually may have got it right on. I guess we'll see. Okay, then go to this side. Nope. I scoot that over. And again, I leave a little bit of a gap so I have room. Go to this side. Okay, I'm very close. Right here is where my latch is, my hinge. I have to make sure that I can get the hinge in there. I can't go too far because I'm going to start butting into this thing. Okay, so I may need to grab this and just pull it back. And then I have to be careful. I can't pull this back because if I pull this back, you see that my holes are not lined up. Okay, so you can see where this can become a very tricky game of getting this stuff into position correctly. Okay, so now let's see, what can we do? We can do probably the simplest thing, which is just to cut some holes here where those hinges would slide into. Let me just see what this edge is. That bottom edge there. Okay. Alright, so now I can go in here and say, okay, I'm going to grab the face here. And I probably need another division going along that way. And this is why we don't want to add too many all at once, because if we start adding in these things as we don't need them, then the ones that we do need don't have really room to get in there. Okay, so just add an extra division right there just to kind of be a border, basically. Okay, so now this here and that there is where the hinges are going to come in. Okay, and the same thing is going to go true up there. And the same thing on this side. Okay. So now let's go and, oops, I'm going to extrude it, but I want to also make sure I grab all the way around. That's good there. I don't need to grab all the way around because it doesn't go all the way around. Try to grab all of these that way. Okay. And if it helps, I say select. So you can see that's what I want to select. Alright. So now I go to extrude. And I'm just going to go hit R for scale and just scale this outward. Okay, so now I have these little pockets here. I have where my door can go in. Okay, so I'm just going to keep building on this thing in this method to try to get this thing to just look mechanical. Okay, that's what we want, is it to look mechanical and look like it could be something that would actually physically work in the real world. Okay, and if we need to play with stuff, we play with stuff. If I needed to, let's say I needed to adjust the positioning of these guys. If I grab this, hit F8, turn to my point mode, I may be able to grab the points correctly. Oops. And scoot this whole thing up. You can see I'm taking my booleans with it. Okay, so I still have some room to play around if I need to. I just have to be very careful that I don't, I can't move this like way up here. That won't work. I can't move this way over here. That won't work. Okay, so that's why we need to save in iterations. I'll save my scene as again, number 3, and just keep moving along this path. Okay. And I save it. Alright, now I'm going to jump back to the scene in a few minutes. Let me go back to my other scene. This one. And I'm going to show you a couple of things that are inside here that are just, things that'll make some of the background mechanics seem to work. And we want to have some of these background mechanics as well to make it look like stuff could be functional. So in this case, I've just taken a cylinder. Okay, and this is actually 2 cylinders put together. Okay, so don't think I've made this out of 1 cylinder. This is 2 cylinders put together. Alright, so create a cylinder. I'm going to snap align it. Okay, now in this case I need divisions. I need lots of divisions in here to get the gears to look correct. Okay, so if I made this 60, I can have 60 divisions going around. I also take the caps off because I don't need the caps. And this may seem tedious, but this is what we have to do, is go through and grab that face, this face, this face, this face. So I'm grabbing every other face. I could grab every 3rd face too, or every 4th face. It all depends on what you want your gear to look like. And I have to have an even number of faces, that way I don't have a gap here. If I had 59 faces, I wouldn't have this perfectly lined up. I'd actually have like a weird spot. So I would extrude that, and I like to go in with a little bit of an offset. Like that. Maybe even a little bit less. And then I extrude it again. I'll pull it out, and then give it another little bit of an offset. Like that. Okay? So now there is a gear, and I can check it to make sure that the gear is going to work. If I duplicate it and scoot it out, these ones will work because they're the same amount of teeth. I could even scale this guy down and push him here, but you can see what's going to happen is these teeth are too tiny for these big teeth. Okay? So if I take a big gear and a little gear, in order for these to work, the teeth have to be just kind of distributed better. So I'm going to grab another cylinder, snap align it so we get it over there, rotate it. I'll take the divisions off and the caps, I'll make this smaller. Okay. Now let's say I wanted this big gear to control a little gear. So what I'm going to do is just kind of size this up and say, okay, well, if this is the gap between the teeth, how does that look there? How does the spacing here look? I think that could work. All right, and if it didn't work, I would go over here and I would add more divisions. But I can't go into 60 because, again, those teeth are just too tiny. So smaller gears are usually going to have bigger teeth if they're going to be interacting with a bigger gear. So then I can go in here to faces and grab every other face. Like that. Extrude again. Tiny offset. Another extrude. Pull it out. And then again, I make sure that it could actually work, so I make sure it's big enough. If that's how far I want them to be apart, then that's how much room I would have to get in there. Okay? Now, how can I test to see if this is actually physically possible, going to work animation-wise? I'm going to test it out. I've given myself some frames down here. Okay, if you're in the animation class, you can do this other ways. If you've had the animation class, you can test it out in other fashions. But I'm just going to do it a very simple way. I'm going to take this and I'm going to just set a key on it. So I'm at 0, I set a key. Oops, apparently I was at frame 35. There you go, set a key at 0. Then I'm going to go up to, I don't care what, let's say 120. I'm going to rotate it around. I'm going to set another key. So now if we look at this, it rotates. Okay, so now a big wheel rotating a little wheel, we're going to get a different kind of rotation. It's not going to be equal. So if I look at this one, it's rotated negative 234. Let's just round this, I guess. Negative 235. Okay, so negative 235 is rotated. So now let me go to my little gear. I'll set a key, and I'm just hitting S to set a key just so it's easier for you to visualize this. 120, and I'm going to rotate this, and like we said, 235. Okay, and I'll set a key. So this isn't going to match up. You can see that the little gear is spinning a lot slower than the big gear. Okay, and you should be spinning a bit faster. So I'm going to rotate this around some more and set a key. Okay, and you can see that I'm almost there. Okay, this one will work. It's just a matter of playing with these settings, making it go a little bit faster. And there's actually a math formula we can do to figure out, how fast this thing should spin. Okay, this guy we started off with 60 divisions here, and we pulled out every other one, so we have essentially 30 teeth. This one we started off with 20, pulled out every other one, so we ended up with 10 teeth. So 30 teeth to 10 teeth. This means that this one's going to rotate 3 times faster than that one. Okay, 30 divided by 10 is 3. Whammo bammo, there's your number. So let me just go back and reset this guy. So I'm just going to delete the keyframes on him. Delete selected. Okay, I'm rotating this back to 0. We'll adjust this in a second. So I'm going to set a key. I can just do it on the 1 attribute. This one rotates to 235. Remember that? Negative 235. So this guy, if I go to my calculator, negative 705. So let's take this guy, and it's not going to be negative, it's going to be positive because he's rotating in the opposite direction. So now let's just see how close we are. And you can see every time one of those gears comes down, it's hitting it perfectly right on it. Okay. Now obviously it's a little bit offset, so I can always go into my graph editor, grab this, I grab the whole graph, I'm in the move tool, and I'm just going to zoom in on an area just so it's a little bit finer movements. Okay, hold down shift, middle drag up, until this thing gets into position, or down, whichever way it works. Okay, so it's basically just offsetting the entire graph. There we go. Okay, so now I have play, and you can see that it lines up perfectly. So I know that these two gears, in an animation sense, would work together. Okay? So I can delete the animations on both by highlighting, right-clicking, and deleting. Okay? And then I just reset these rotations back to 0. Okay? And I can rotate this so that it actually makes sense. Let's go and put that like there. And then I can freeze transform these so that they're both nice and neat. So there's no rotational values on either of those. So when we start rotating this, it's going to start from a neutral position. Okay. Now if I want to do something like this where I have a big gear and a little gear, what I can do is I'm going to take this guy and just shrink him down and put him here. Oops. And then I'm going to grab both of these and go to Mesh Combine. And then I'm going to grab the face here and extrude it. And just bring it down. Grab this face, extrude it, bring it down. I'm basically just setting up where they're going to connect at. Then I can grab both faces and say Edit Mesh Bridge. Try that again. Edit Mesh Bridge. There we go. And then I'm going to take my divisions to 0. And then you can see there's a little bit of a taper on it. Let's go to my side view. Okay, it's a little bit of a taper. So I'm just going to deselect the points on one and just scale it down the other side. Okay, so now what I've done is I've just created this gear that has a tiny gear attached to it. So if, let's say, this gear is the motor and this one's spinning, it's going to spin the big gear, which is going to in turn spin the little gear, which I could have attached to, let's say, another little gear. And these are both 60, so I should be safe in assuming that they could work together. Yes, there we go. Okay. So now this guy could spin, and then he would spin this big guy, and then this big guy would spin this little guy, which spins this big guy. And then on each of these, maybe I have like a belt or something attached to them that would spin something further down the chain. Okay. Now the same way that I created these, I created this thing here. Okay, it's just a cube instead of that. And what I've done is just gone the entire length of that with the extrusions on the top. Okay, same exact way. Now we have, creating belts is a tricky bit of business. Here's a belt that I created, and if I rotate it, you can see that it's going to actually animate like it would be animating a belt. Okay, it's actually upside down, which is just something I goofed up on. But it's also something I wouldn't actually use. If we look at the top of the belt, you can see how tight these things are. And as I go further down, they actually stretch out. Okay, so we wouldn't actually use this method to do a belt. Okay, and it's very important that we understand that, because as we start modeling things, let's see, I borrow this guy. As I start modeling things and putting them in my scene, I need them to eventually be animated. I can't just simply create stuff like that. Okay, like this guy here, if I went to create deformers nonlinear bend, I rotated my bend handle down. I went to my curvature here, and went up like this. I don't know why it's doing that. Negative 180. I don't know why it's creating that extra face in there. It just didn't like the outside bend, most likely. All right. So something like this, you see we create that belt shape. Okay. But this isn't animatable. If I rotate it, you can see this goes crazy. Okay. Well, if I grab both of these, and then let's say I group them and center pivot it and rotate it. Oops. I put my pivot up here, actually. Go. and then rotate it, you see I get basically the similar results. Oops. There we go. So I get that. All right, now, okay, well, that's not really going to help me because the my gears may not be perfectly circle. Okay, there may be a gear, like in this case, there's a belt that connects these to this, oops, to that. Okay, there's no way that this belt that I have here is going to do that. So the way that this one works is I did this, and then I deleted the history, and then I went to create deformer's lattice, and then I created this lattice that allows me to stretch this out. But you can see it stretches it out and makes these like ugly divisions here. But if I grab it and rotate it, you can see that it does sort of kind of work. Okay, and for some things you might even be able to get away with doing something like that. The correct way to do a belt is, where's my other guy right here, is by using something like this. Okay, and this is, obviously it's a bit more complex setup, but this allows me to offset my animation and keep all of these the exact same size. Okay, so the way that this guy is set up is I have individual chains, and that's what a belt should be. It should be individual chains, and I'm just going to create something very, very simple for those individual chains. Okay, bam, chain. So then what I'm going to do is put my pivot down here, duplicate, hold down V, snap this over. Okay, so it's my second chain. Shift D, Shift D, Shift D, all the way down until I get all my chains that I need. There we go. Okay, so now I have a bunch of chains here. Now I need to connect them. So I'm going to go to Skeleton and go to Joint Tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down V and just click at each one of these pieces. Okay, so wherever I see this big spot, the second thing going down, that's where I'm clicking. And it just has to be in the same spot for each one. It doesn't have to be exact. Yeah, or exactly the same spot that I have it. And that one. Okay. So now I have this skeleton here. Works perfect. So then what I could do is I can take this piece, and if I shift click this piece and I parent it, just so you can see, if I grab this and parent this, what's going to happen is if I grab this and start rotating it, it's going to intersect the other one. Okay, we don't want that. So what I can do is take the skeleton. Actually, let me take all the joint gear pieces first, all my little pieces, and go to Mesh Combine. And I'm going to delete the faces and connect them all, so I have one track basically. Okay. I'm going to go to face mode. I'm just going to marquee. And what I've done is I've marqueed, if you look at this, all of these faces that are on the inside. I'll isolate select so you can see all those faces right there. That's where they were touching. And I'm going to delete them, except for, actually I can delete all of them. There we go. Okay, so I've deleted this, so now it's hollow. So I'm going to grab this, shift click. Oops. Sorry, one more step. I've deleted those faces, but they're still not connected. If I click here and move, you can see that it's still open. So I need to just go to Edit Mesh and say Merge, and just make sure this number is set really, really low, so that now they are connected. Okay. So now I'm going to grab this, delete the history, shift click my joints, go to, let's make sure it's centered first. There we go. There we go. Now we can grab the joints, grab that, go to Skin, Bind Skin, Smooth Bind. Okay, so now what's going to happen is I can grab these joints and rotate them, and you can see how they're all kind of rotating together. All right, it'll look better once we have it fully finished. So now I can create a circle. I can rotate it. Oops. I'm going to give it some more divisions, like 12. In order for this to work, these things have to be uniformly laid out, okay? Which means that I can't have this kind of structure, because you can see how I have lots of points up here at the top and not a lot of points near the bottom or near the middle. Okay, well, let's say that's the shape that I wanted. Here's my belt. I can go under Edit Curves and say Rebuild Curve and make this uniform and give me, I don't even care how many, give me 20 points. And I hit Apply, and you can see that it didn't change the shape, but if we hit F8 and go to our points, that these points are now laid out nice and neat. Okay, that's just an extra step that's going to save you a little bit of heartache later. Okay, now obviously this curve is pretty tiny compared to these gears. So I may need to take the curve up. I may need to just kind of plan better as to where my stuff is going to be and maybe scale this whole structure down. Okay, so I may have to go in the outliner, shift click the joint here to open up all the joints. Shift click this bottom one and then just scale this entire joint chain down so that it's tinier so that it'll fit on my stuff. Okay, so we can still edit this after. Alright, so we're good. So now let me go in here and say, click everything off. Skeleton IK Spline, option box. I want to turn Auto Create Curve off. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the start of this, click on the end of this, and then click on my curve. And you can see what happens is it takes my chain and pops it right onto this curve. Okay, and it creates this little handle here where I can go to offset and middle drag, and you can see how it's moving along that curve. Okay, it's not the right size, so again I can scale my curve down, or I can grab my joints and scale those down. I gotta get that close so that it matches. Okay, and I can even do this after the fact, is I can grab these vertices here and say Edit Mesh Merge. And that way I won't have a hole here, it'll look like it's one continuous chain. There we go. So now I have this thing, which is an IK handle, that I can offset and animate this thing going around and around. Okay. Now my stuff is on the opposite side, so I can go to Roll and put in 180, so it flips it to the inside, and then I can use my offset and set this thing up. That's perfect. Okay, now it goes fast. Let me just right click on offset and set a key at frame 1. I'll go up to 120. Its high value is 1, so I'll set another key there. So now if I rewind it and hit play, you can see this thing spinning. And that's what we would want. Okay, so there's that. Okay, this other guy that I have here is a little bit different setup. Okay, and this is why the other way I showed is a better way to work. This way doesn't always work, and it takes some playing around for this to work. Track script. There's a track script for Maya on Creative Crash. Okay, so this is what it does, is it creates these kinds of gears. And there's a video here you can watch. So he has like tread, he needs to create this curve, he has this, clicks a couple buttons. And now he has this track perfectly laid out. Okay. Now this is the default setup, is that it did this for me. Okay. You can download the script, you can play with it, whatever. Okay. It has a little PDF that comes with it. You just drop the script into your script folder and reboot Maya, and then you just type in that name down here in the bottom. It'll pop up the window, and then you do your stuff. Okay. So it takes some playing around to get it to look correct. You can see in this case it's actually like flipping my track to the other side. And that could be a result of my curve. It could be a result of any number of elements. Okay. So whatever we want to have in here, that's what we would kind of set this thing up. So if I go back to this curve that I have, I just move the curve around. You can see I can move this wherever I need to move it to. So I'm just going to scoot it down here. And I'm going to scale the curve down because I know that the curve has to be a certain size. There's no getting around the size of that. Okay, now it's going to look funky until I get it adjusted. Okay, so let's just say it's about there. I'm going to go to my outliner, control click or shift click on my joints. Okay, the little plus sign that opens up all of them. And then I can grab them all and just scale it down until they fit. Okay, and let me go into wireframe so I can see. That's where they're going to fit there. And I could even grab this, and let me see if I can unlock my Z, center pivot it, and then just scale this down here. Okay, you don't want to do too much manipulation after you've skinned something, so you just have to be careful with it. And I'm just going to isolate some of these objects. This. There we go. So now I can just look at this and say, okay, what is this supposed to look like without looking at the other stuff? Okay, and this is all stuff you want to have set up before you actually create all the curves. Okay, so I actually want to create my curve, get it lined up in this area exactly where I need it to be, and then I can go through and play with the IK spline handle tool settings and all that. Okay. The workflow that I'm showing here is just, I showed the example and then I'm trying to position it. You actually want to get all the stuff in position, get the size of these tracks done first, and then go through and do your IK spline in order for everything to kind of connect. Okay, so let's just pretend that that's it. Okay, so now we have our gears here. I may need to go through and grab the IK or the joints again. And I'm just going to scale them down just to make sure that we're still good. And I was not, I was overlapping. There we go. So now if I grab this, you can see that it looks like that thing is actually set up on it. Now, is it actually controlling it? No, it's just going to be something that's just kind of fakely rigged or fakely set up in order for this stuff to happen. Okay? But it looks like it, and from this side, yeah, it looks exactly like it. Okay? Especially if we were to look at this and see that this gear is moving as this thing is like rotating around, that'd be exactly what we'd want. Okay? But as far as modeling, that's how we want to model this. We don't want to, try to place these things individually. Okay, so there's several different methods you could obviously approach that whole thing on. Okay, so gears, we would have, these little things are what are actually going to pull the door open. Okay, so I'm thinking of what's going to unlock the door, and then once the door is unlocked, how is it going to get out of here? So these things, the gears would rotate, and the door would just kind of go, and then close. Okay, so let's jump back to our other scene. I'll save that, sure. Okay, so now you'd have gears and whatever else you'd have back here doing whatever you have back here. Okay, and like I said, we would have most likely a wall here that's just kind of covering it. But for now, we can ignore the wall. So now we're going to be at the rendering stage. Okay, there's no animation to this, just because the animation for this would be a lot more complex than we would want. So you're basically going to be turning in sort of kind of a still. Okay, it's going to be an animated still essentially. So we're rendering out one frame, but we're going to do some animation inside of After Effects. So I'm going to go into my render layers here, and we're going to set up some render layers. So I'm going to grab all the stuff that's in our scene. Okay, I'm going to make sure history is deleted also, just so we don't get anything funky happening. I can also see that I didn't take this pivoting over to the other side, or this, not pivoting, these holes onto the other side. So I'm going to use, on this, I'm going to go to Mesh, and I'm going to say Mirror Cut, and let's see, YZ plane. Okay, it actually did it backwards, so let me go and rotate this to 270. There we go. Perfect. So I can delete history on my plane. Delete that. That's good. And then up here, too, I didn't have those holes put in there. Now I can't do the same thing here because we have certain spots on this side. Actually, can I? Yes, I think I can. Okay. I can do that up there, too. Okay, so Mesh, Mirror Cut. I did the wrong side, so I changed my Y to 270, and it does the right side. Delete history, delete that. Okay. Sometimes when you mirror, it'll do this, where you just lose your shaders. So just reassign Lambert 1, and you'll get your stuff back. All right. So I do need to have these little pins copied over as well. So I'm just going to duplicate, and I can just move them over. There we go. Okay. All right. So now the way we're going to set this up, and I'm going to go and grab just a couple gears from my other file real quick. I'll just grab this whole setup here. Grab the joints. Grab that. I'll grab some of these pieces also. Okay, so I'm just going to export these out. And then go back into my Mech-Door and then re-import these. And they're going to be tiny, I know that. They're probably minuscule, super duper tiny things. But here's how I can scale them up, is I just grab that group that I brought in, and I just scale up. I can't just scale up the group. I actually have to go in here and do more work. Grab all of my gears, group those separately, and scale that up. I must have history on something. There we go. Now I can scale it up. Okay, so I'm just throwing this in here, just as a placeholder. There you go, something like that. Okay, so we'll pretend that that's set up. Okay, you would actually have stuff inside here. This would be working better. Then I can grab my curve, scale this up. You can see the trouble you can get into when you try to bring in, stuff from one file into another file. You always have these scale issues, sizing issues that we need to adjust. And I go grab my gears again. Scale the joints up until they fit. I'm not completely sure why that's doing that, but we'll just ignore it for now. Okay, it still works. I can still grab this and do the offset if I need to. Okay. All right, so now we have this stuff here. I would duplicate it, put it over here as well. As far as the modeling stage goes, realistically, I could just grab, if I'm just modeling this, and that's all we're really doing in this case, I could delete the history on this, okay, which renders all this stuff useless. Okay, and that way I can just drop this in here, Control G to group it, Control D to duplicate it, negative scale it. Now it looks like I have stuff on both sides, and I would actually have to have some sort of gear probably connecting this to that. You know, maybe that goes underground, I don't know what. But we'll just leave it like that for now. Okay. And what we want to do is set this thing up so that we can see the levels, see the layers of this. All right. So layer 1 is going to be everything I'm seeing on the surface. So this, the bar, all of this mess that's inside here. There we go. And that guy. Okay. So that's all layer 1, is just all this stuff that we see right on the surface. So I'm going to make a new layer. I'm actually going to make 2 layers. One is on the surface 1, and then on the surface 2. Okay. Now these render layers, these are different than display layers, will only be those objects that I had selected. Okay. So if I go back to my master layer, they're still there. We still have the gears. But if I go to the other layers, they're not there. Okay. So I'm going to go back to my master layer, and I'm going to grab some of these items here. Okay. These would be my gears. You know, I can grab that. Okay, those are my back gears. I'm going to make 2 layers. Call this back gears 1. Back gears 2. Good. And let's see what else. I have some gears inside here. There we go. Do the same thing on this side. Don't want those. Good. So I'll make 2 more layers. Inner gears 1. Inner gears 2. Back to master layer. And then I have my pins. And 2 layers for these. Pins 1 and pins 2. Okay, so I have all my stuff on here that I need. Yours is going to be different, obviously. You have different stuff set up in yours. But mine is set up like that. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to render out a solid color for these things. And then we're going to render out wireframe. Okay. So all the ones are going to be wireframes. Okay. So all these ones that are here are just going to be wireframes. So I'm going to go to on the surface, right click, do an override, create new material override, and I can pick any one of these. Okay, I typically pick surface shader. And if I go in the attribute editor, there's nothing in here that's going to say wireframe. Okay, and if I hit this back button, I can't even get to this. I don't even know why that doesn't even work anymore, but it used to. I'm going to go to the hypershade. And here's that surface shader. So I'm going to double click it. I'm going to call it wireframe shader. Okay. So if I click this double arrow, I get the surface shader, and that's what I need. This guy here, the surface shading, or the shading group. Click on the shading group, and under the mental ray area, there's a contours area, and here I want to enable contour rendering. which is essentially wireframe rendering. So here's the alpha channel, which we'll get to. Here's the width, which we'll get to. Here's the relative width, which we'll get to. Here's the color, which we'll get to. Under my render settings, I need to change this to mental ray. Under features, there's a contours on the very bottom. I'm going to enable contour rendering. Under draw by property difference, I'm going to say around all polyfaces. So now if I go and hit render, I'm not going to see anything. Okay, there's one more step that we have to do. And this is a Maya 2014 step, not a Maya 2013 step. Under quality, I have to change this from unified sampling to legacy rasterizing or legacy sampling mode. Okay, legacy sampling mode. So now when I hit render, I'll see the wireframe on here. Now it's thick, it's chunky, and it's ugly. That's where we can come back to that surface shader and control the width, 0.25. Now you can't go too low or you won't see it. Okay, you can see we're getting dotted lines on here. In the render settings, back on features, we have this oversampling. If I take this up to like 10, I'll get better sampling, but still not perfect. So sometimes it's a matter of playing with this width and playing with this oversampling to get something. Now eventually the oversampling is not going to do a thing. Okay, you'll eventually get to a spot where it's just not going to do anything. We can also change the filter type and maybe even take the filter off a little bit. Oops, not off. Take it down until we get something good. Okay, we take it up, it goes 2 is the highest. Okay, we get something that's nice and crisp and clear, and it looks pretty decent. Obviously this bar, there's a lot of divisions on the bar, so that's why this looks like it's basically a solid piece. Okay, and it's also going to help us if we render this thing out at double size. So instead of HD 540, we're going to render this at HD 1080 and then shrink it down to 960 by 540. Okay, which obviously is going to take a little bit longer, but we're only doing one frame. Okay, so here is the 1:1. You can see that this looks a little bit clearer. Some of these look a little bit clearer as well. Okay, and we have all of our bolts here, which look nice. Some of these aren't showing up. Make sure that they're on here first. Yeah, they're on there. It's just hard to see because of where we're at. Okay. All right, so that's going to be number 1. Okay, so I can just right-click on each one of these number 1s, go to overrides, assign existing override, and make the wireframe shader. Okay, and then test it out. Go to this gear, hit the render button, and I can see there's the gears. Go to right-click on this one, overrides, assign existing, oops, wireframe, and then test it out. Most of your problems are going to come from not testing it out. Oops, cancel. Let's go through and save the scene as number 4. And finally the pins, overrides, wireframe, and then test it out. There we go. Okay, cool. So now that we have that, let's go to the 2. Now the 2 is going to be different materials on here. Okay, so I want to highlight some of these different materials. So I'm going to grab the doors, and the doors will be, let's say, one material. So I'm going to put a surface shader on here. And the surface shader is simply a color. So I'm just going to pick a color. We're not doing linear workflow, so we can ignore linear workflow for this specific assignment. Okay, then grab the wall and assign a different one. Oops, I didn't label that one. Let me make sure I label that one. Door, flat, yellow. There we go. And then for the wall, wall, flat. I don't know what I'm going to pick. Probably a gray. Just desaturate it. And then for the ground, I'll assign a new surface shader, round, flat, let's say dark gray. Okay, so what this is going to look like when it renders, and we're not fully finished yet, is flat coloring. Okay, so you can see this flat coloring that we have on top of here. It's hard to see the detail that we put in. We'll get to that in a minute. But for now, that's good. Okay, so then what we can do is take these pieces here and assign different materials to those pieces. Now, I would not do every single piece individually. I would maybe grab those and assign one material to it. Grab the bar, assign a different material. Grab this, assign a different material. Okay, let's say we have these. We'll go surface shader. There we go. Latches, flat, or orange, or whatever that would be. And this is button, flat, blue. I think if I have a nice little splash of color right in the center, it might be kind of neat. And then this guy, bar, flat. I'll do flat gray on the bar too. So I'll use a different gray. Just brighten it up a little bit more. Okay. All right, so now we have this. I'll save it. Render. Okay, now these ones we don't need to render out at double size. This was going to be fine at standard size. Okay. So what I'm going to do is go to my render settings. And I'm going to right click on my preset, or right click on the width, and do a layer override. Right click on the height, make a layer override. So on this one, I'm basically putting 960 by 540. And so what that means is that when I go to on the surface 1, we're at double the size. When I go to on the surface 2, we're at half size. Okay, that way it'll go quicker. I'm also going to take my quality samples up on these. This is going to be a universal thing. Because it doesn't have an override, whatever I change on one is going to change on the other. If I want specific settings on one and not the other, I right click and do an override. Okay, so I'm going to go back to number 2, and I'm going to add in an ambient occlusion pass. I'm going to connect it, and I'm going to double click this and then just change my AO settings so that I have the maximum distance maybe set to 5, spread to 0.8. Okay, I go to features, rendering features, make sure ambient occlusion is on, hit the render button again. And now we're not going to see anything different in here, but when we go to our passes, we'll have an ambient occlusion pass. And that'll help kind of pull out some of this detail. The point I want you to get at this stage is that Maya is not simply a realistic rendering thing. There's lots of different methods that we can do to output different things. So now let me go to my load render pass AO. And we can see that we have a nice ambient occlusion on here. It's actually a little bit muddy right in these areas, so I probably want to adjust that. Okay, so let me go back to my ambient occlusion settings. Oops. Maybe 5 is a bit too much. Let's take this down to 2. We'll take our spread down as well. And we can also take our shadow or our rays up a little bit if we're seeing that, you know, it's a little bit blotchy. Okay, we're just about done. Then we can check our pass. Okay. Actually, I think they introduced maybe a little bit more noise into our scene by lowering the settings. Okay, so again, it's a game. We play with, take this, instead of going down, let's take this up. Let's go to 10. And I can always go and render just a section of this. Like if I saw that, you know, this is where I was having a lot of trouble, just grab that section and render it. It'll look the same here in my surface shader. I can go and load the render pass and it'll just show me that area. That looks a bit better, it's more spread out. I'm going to take my spread down to, or up to 1. There we go. That's more of what I was after, is something just a little bit crisper. Okay, maybe 0.9 would work too. I can probably take my raise down and that'll make it a little bit quicker. Maybe 0.95. There you go. I think that could work. So now let me do just a full pass. So essentially we're going to have just this ambient occlusion that just kind of highlights some of our areas. That's what we want to do, is just highlight those areas where we have, little bits of detail. That wasn't a terribly long render. Yeah, you can see the white here. We have this dark area here. So I think that'll turn out nice. Again, we'll test it before we can do anything crazy. So now let's go do the same thing on the other ones. So on my back gears, I want to make sure on number 2 I associate the ambient occlusion with it. I can give basically just a couple different colors, like these guys. I'll add 1 color. Use background shader. Oops, not use background shader. That's the wrong shader I want. Surface shader. And gears flat. And we could even use, if this was something we're doing for a client, we could even use these colors as a way to kind of emphasize what's happening and what will be moving. So let me jump back to my master layer. I could have the doors and the wall, let's say the wall and the floor, be static objects. They just get a flat color of gray. And the more movement an object has, the brighter the color would be. So these objects here, maybe they have just like a yellowy color. These have a little bit brighter yellow because there's a little bit more movement and stuff going on. And these gears have a really, really bright yellow because there's a lot of movement on them. And that'll give the animator an idea of what's going on too. So you can do lots of different things with this method. Surface shader on here. Big gears. Flat. I'm going to go with the yellowy color on this one. That. And then just this green here. Belt. Flat green. Okay, go to inner gears 2. Let's pick a color first. Inner gears flat green. Go with the blue on this. We'll just make it a little bit dimmer. Okay, make sure I go to the render settings and associate the AO pass with it. Go to my pins 2, associate the AO pass with it. And just give these guys a color. We're nearly there. We're nearly at the end. Actually, I kind of like that color. Okay. All right, so that's that. I also need to make sure I go into my common area and do a layer override on all of these size ones. Okay, so all the 2s should be at 960 by 540, all the 1s at 1920 by 1080. So right click, override. You can tell they're overridden because they're orange. Oops. And see, I changed this one to 540 here, but I didn't make it orange. So if I go back to Gears 1, you can see that that one has now been messed up. Let's set that back to 1080, and then make the override 540. That one's good. Okay, let me make sure they all have the AO associated with them on 2. They do. Good. Make sure my quality's up. It is. Let's set up a camera. So I can go to render. There we go. All right, I can't see my camera, so I'm going to go to view, camera settings, and say horizontal. Why didn't I see my... All right, I'm going to make a new camera. For whatever reason, it's not showing me my camera settings. All right, I think it's there. It's just hidden. So let me go to my camera and go to display options. Okay, so my last file, I don't know, got messed up somehow, and it wasn't rendering at all. So I ended up re-importing file import that scene into here, and now everything works. So I don't know what happened. But now that blue circle works, so let me set up our camera. And I'm going to do view camera settings, overscan. There we go. That way I can see where the roof of this is. And I want to make sure I'm fitting everything. So I'm going to go to my master layer, go to wireframe, and make sure I can fit everything inside here. So I may need to go to my camera settings and just take my focal length up, so I can indeed get everything into my view plane. Okay, or I can take it the other way. Let's go 50, go to wireframe, and zoom out. And it may even be that, okay, well, you know, I can't really get too close to this in this direction, so maybe I need to go like on an angle a little bit, and then maybe even take this face, or these faces, or vertices, probably quicker to grab the vertices. Yep, and then just pull those up. Okay, but I want it covering the entire thing. I don't want to have any gaps there or any holes. There we go. So I think that should be good. Let me click my camera. I'm going to go to frame 1 and hit S to set a key. That way, in case I accidentally move it, I just move back to frame 1 and I'm good. All right. So now I can just do, you know, a couple little tests, make sure everything's good here. Okay, check out my AO again. Ambient occlusion was off. Let me turn it back on. Now, I want to have, just like before, on the 2 layer, I want ambient occlusion on, but on the 1 layer, I don't. So I'm going to right-click. Oops. I'm going to go to frame pins 1. Okay. Apparently, we can't just turn that off for that one. All right. Well, it's not going to render anyway, but just in case it decided to. It's weird. I can do it for everything else except for ambient occlusion and radiance. Whatever. Alright, so I guess I'll just leave it like it is. Obviously, I can check out these colors, make sure that I'm happy with the way the colors are looking. Okay, so now I'm going to render this stuff out. So let's go to the Common tab again. Make sure we choose the right camera. We're only doing a single frame, but I'm going to come up here and rename it so that we have a nice looking naming convention. So we're going to right click and say insert layer name, and then that should be basically it. I can underscore and do a right click, insert past name. That way I'll have the ambient occlusion as a separate render if I needed to, which I want. Quality, make sure this is set to legacy sampling mode, which is what we had it on before. Just verify that that is rendering. Okay, now this is actually going a bit slower than I want it to go. I can do maybe one more step to get that to work better. Where's my wireframe at? Oh, I have to go back to contours and turn that on too. Okay. 10. And the reason it's not showing up is because of me having to re-import it. Okay, so the one thing that's going to help is if we do this hide source. And obviously it's not doing anything super quick, but it might help us a little bit in the long run. There we go. Now we can see all the little things here, all these. I'll probably want to go into that material. So I just go to overrides. I don't want to assign it. I just want to go to grab a piece. There we go. I'll just grab one of the pieces and then go to wireframe shader. There it is. And again, it's not working to grab that, so I'll have to go in the hypershade. Sometimes it'll work. You can just click that button and it takes you right to it. So it's not working, so I'm going to go here, graph it out, go back to the shading group, and then just take this width up a little bit more, 0.5. And that'll help thicken out some of these lines that might be just a little bit thinner. There we go. That seems a little bit better. Okay. So now, just so we see the other things, here's the color. You can change the color of it. The alpha, if you wanted to add some transparency, like if you had multiple objects in your scene. The relative width or the absolute width. If we render a section of this, let's just grab, I guess grab this. There's lots of different detail here. Okay, it's doing a width based on the specific object. So changing this up to 0.1, or changing it down to 0.1, or even down to 0.005, we're going to get different kinds of widths in here just based on the individual objects themselves. Where absolute basically sets one width for everything. Okay, so that width that we set is the same width for all the objects in our scene. So sometimes even like playing with these settings, you can get some better results. But again, it's a matter of playing with these things to get them. I think I was good before when I had the 0.5. Oops. When I had this set to 0.5 and I had it set to absolute, I was satisfied with the direction that this is looking. Okay, so I'm going to leave it like that. Okay, and then under our render settings, this one that we clicked around all poly faces, there's other ones here like around silhouette, which would render the silhouette of the shader itself. I don't know if we'll even see anything because I don't think we'll have any silhouettes. No, we don't. Okay, but you can do around between different instances, so it'd be between different objects. There it is. So now it's just doing it between the different objects, between different materials, between different labels, so you can label things. Around render tessellation, so it'll be the triangles. Okay, so we can show that. Front versus back face. Okay, this is typically what I do is the around all poly faces. Okay. All right, so I think we're good. One more thing I'm just going to check is that. Okay, so on the 2s, I'm going to turn off contour rendering. So I'm going to create a layer override, turn it off. Go to 2. It's not going to do anything, but just in case, you know, there's a slight performance increase, let's just do it just to do it. There we go. Okay. And again, just to make sure, no, still nothing. All right. So let's save. Let's go to batch render and just hit batch render. Now this is going to go through, it's going to do one frame, and it's going to do all of these layers though. So it's going to go, I should have turned that one off. I want master layer off and then all these other ones. But master layer shouldn't take too long anyway. So it's going to go here, 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 and so on, all the way up the chain because all the green check boxes are clicked. So if we watch, you can see the master beauty is done. Oh, on the surface too, right. There we go. Because Master Beauty is the layer name, so that's what's going to show. So we'll wait for this to get done, and then we'll composite it to... Alright, our rendering is complete. So the next thing we want to do is we want to take this, make sure we save, of course, take this into After Effects, and then we're going to composite it. So we'll just wait for After Effects to come up. Okay, so we're in After Effects. I'm going to go to the project area here. I'm just going to double click, and I'm going to go to my folder, there, 2520, work, Mechdor 2, images, and here are all of our images that we output. Okay, so it's not too crazy. Any alpha channels, I'm just going to say ignore. Okay, and if I need to, I can drop them on as I need to. Okay, so I'm going to make a new comp. It's going to be 960 by 540. Square pixels, 24 frames per second is good. The duration of 10 seconds in this case. Actually, let's do a full minute, so 1,000, whatever you want to put there, 10,000. Background black is fine for now. We'll hit OK. Okay, so here's our comp. Here's the comp down here. I'm just going to grab all my pieces and just drag them down. Okay, this is my effects control. This is my paragraph stuff. I'm just going to kind of move my stuff around here a little bit. Let me close those. There we go. That should work. Okay. So now in here, I don't know why these all came in at the edge. I'm just going to highlight all of these and just hit my left bracket to bring them all in line. So then I just want to organize these. So if we look at my back here, Master Beauty doesn't show anything. There's the AO. So look at that, because that one should be obviously there. Let's organize these. So on the surface is our first one. So that should be on the very bottom. So I'm just grabbing all the on the surface ones, putting that on the bottom. Let's see, pins is good there. And I think I want to do the pins 2, pins 1. Pins 1 is my contour, pins 2 is that. Okay, that's right. Okay, so my ambient occlusions are going to be on top. And the, oops, no, they were in the right order. There we go. There we go. Just organizing myself. Let's turn back gears off for now. Okay. So here are the inner gears. That should be the wireframe on top, then the AO, and then that. Okay? And that's why these ones aren't showing, because remember that we have those at a different size. So all of these ones here, back gears 1, inner gears 1, pins 1. Oops. There's my regular Master Beauty. We don't need that. I'm going to delete it. You may not have that one. So all of my ones, I'm grabbing, I'm hitting S, and I'm going to scale to 50%. There we go. Now I can see my back ears, which is why I couldn't see them before. Okay, so it should be the wireframe on top, then the ambient occlusion, and then our color layer Okay. So what we're going to do is just make mini comps, basically, of all of these pieces. So I'm going to go and grab these two guys here, which is my AO and my color. And I'm just going to take the AO's mode to multiply. And I'm going to shift click the master beauty for it and go to layer, pre-compose. And this is going to be back gears color. Okay. I'm going to do the same thing for this one. Inner gears 2 AO changes to multiply. Grab them both. Control Shift C. Inner gears color. Go to the pins AO, changes to multiply. Shift click that one. Control Shift C. Pins color. Grab my on the surface, multiply, shift click the master beauty, on the surface, color. Okay. So now what I want to do is I want my, I can't see my color and my beauty. Okay. My wireframe's on top. So I can change my mode in here to something like add. If I change it to add, you can see that my wireframe goes right on top of it. I could also look at lighten and see how that looks. I can look at screen and see how that looks. I can change it to overlay. Obviously, it's going to darken it. I can play with any of these just to see what these other settings are going to look like. If I go in here, it's going to darken it, regardless of which one I pick. Okay. But if I go to something like soft light, I get a different effect. I go to whatever. Lots of different things we can get with playing with just these settings. So I'm going to leave mine on, I think I liked it better on, not overlay, screen. Let's see. Yeah. Might have not done a whole lot. Let me just scoot that over so I can see it better. Yeah, add actually brightens it up a little bit more. I like the way the screen is leaving it a little bit dimmer. Okay. And you can see how our ambient occlusion is giving us this little bit of detail in here. Okay. If we didn't have the ambient occlusion, it would just look like flatness. Okay. Now in here, I can't see the stuff that's underneath it, and I want to see the stuff that's underneath it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my master beauties that are in here. Right click. Oh, I can't do them all at the same time apparently. I'm going to right click on the first one, interpret the footage, and do pre-multiply with black. So I'm just going to do that to all of my things that are inside here. All of my master beauties. And we could have done this ahead of time, but I like to make sure I'm getting the results that I want and then look at that. Okay. Okay, so we're not getting our alpha channel to pop through. Okay. So we have back ears here, but we're still not seeing the stuff that's underneath it. Okay. Now if I change this back to normal. No, that was screen. That's what I wanted. Screen. And change this to screen 2. Now I don't actually need to change these to screen because I applied the alpha to it. You can see that we're getting essentially the same results. Okay, here's the back ears normal. Here's the back ears with screen. Because we have the alpha channel on there now, we don't need to even worry about it. Okay, but I like to change them to screen just so that, you know, if there is a slight color change, it's applied there. Okay, so because of this, because of the ambient occlusion, we're not getting anything. Okay, if I double click back ears color, and I look at this here, okay, I look at the alpha channel, you see it's perfectly solid white. Okay, if I turn the alpha channel off and then I look at the alpha, you see that we have an opening. So what I need to do is I need to still apply the ambient occlusion, but I don't want it to do fill up the rest of this. Okay, so there's a couple ways to do it. I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to make a new adjustment layer inside of this back gears color comp. The adjustment layer is going to go below the ambient occlusion. And I'm going to come over here to track matte, and I'm going to use this as a Luma matte. Okay? So essentially what's happening is I'm using my ambient occlusion to drive this adjustment layer. I lose my effect on here, so I'm going to go to Effects, Color Correction, Exposure on the adjustment layer, and just knock the exposure down. Okay? Now it's actually doing it backwards. You see that we're getting white in these areas. So I'm going to go to Luma and invert it. There we go. So now you see we've got basically our ambient occlusion is back in there, and now we actually have a slider where we can adjust how much ambient occlusion we're producing on here. So no ambient occlusion, ambient occlusion. Okay, and then if we look at the alpha, we have an alpha channel. Success. So now what I'm going to do is just take this adjustment layer and copy it. I'm going to go to my other layers, so like pins. I'm going to paste it in, make sure it's in the right order, make sure it's Luma inverted, make sure I'm getting an alpha channel. Okay, I'm not, because this is still on. Let me turn that eyeball off. Oops, Luma matte. This is what I want to go to RGB. Good. So then we'll go to inner gears. I'll turn that off. Turn this to Luma inverted. Good. And we'll check the results of it before and after just to see, you know, what are we getting. Let's see, back gears, that's the one I did first. Okay, I can do on the surface, but this is my bottom layer. It doesn't really matter. Okay, but just for the sake of consistency, let's put it on here. Turn that off. There we go. Okay, so now if I go back to Comp 1, you can see how we have everything laid out here. So now we can do a little rearranging to get things into how we want this thing to play out. Okay, so I don't want everything on at once. Let me hide some of these other layers. That should be good. I want to turn things on as they go. Okay, and maybe this will be like the order of how things animate. So on the surface is always going to be there. So let me turn these off. Okay, so we get on the surface. So I'm going to have on the surface, I'm going to have its wireframe come on. And then I'll do the pins, and then have their wireframe come on. And then I'll do inner gear. Oops, sorry, not inner gear. Then I'll do back gears. Let's move that down. I'll have back gears wireframe come on. Then I'll do inner gears. Then I'll have inner gears wireframes turn on. Okay? So I'm going to do all of these things in that kind of order. So what I can do is if I grab this one, shift click that one, and I go to layer, animation, keyframe assistant, sequence layers, I'm going to say overlap. The duration of the overlap, I want it to be, or the duration of each, of the overlap, all right, is going to be 3, let's just say 30 frames, okay? And the transition is I'm going to dissolve the front layer. So now if I hit OK, we can see what's going to happen is it basically lays this out like this, and then we have nothing until we get to there, okay? So what I need to do is hit undo and cut this down to the size that I want these things to be. So let's say that I want just between each shot, I want this to be say 112. Okay, so that's 1 second and 12 frames. So I have everything selected. I'm going to Alt, right bracket, and that cuts it like that. And then I make sure I grab, this is the order I'm doing this in. This is first, this is last. Animation, keyframe assistant, sequence layers, duration, let's do 1 second, dissolve front layer, overlap, good. Okay, and now what's going to happen is they're going to disappear. So here's the front, we get the wireframe, We get the bars. Oops, that's gone. Oops, and then stuff starts disappearing. Okay, so what I'm going to do at the very end of this is just make sure my cursor is at the end, and then I'm going to hold down Alt and use the right bracket to make sure they extend all the way to the end. Okay, so here's this. You can see all the things kind of popping on to the scene. Okay, now we could also go in here and we can tint these. Because these things are now using the alpha channel instead of the screen mode, let me just, I think it'll be fine on screen still, but I can go to Effect, and I can add a color correction to this. So I could use toner, I can use change color, change to color. Okay, so if I say change from white to, let's say, red. Okay, and those are my inner gears. And let me change it back to normal, see if that's going to make a difference. No, why aren't you changing? Change hue. That should be all that from white, which is white. Let's check the tolerance. Alright, let's try a different one. That one doesn't seem to want to work correctly. Color correction, color balance. No, not color balance. Oops. Hue saturation, that's what I was looking for. Colorize. I should be getting some color results on here. Oh, there it goes. I had to light or darken it, that's why it wasn't showing anything. Okay, so now I can go into a different color range and basically pick whatever color I'm at. I think if I put this back to screen, okay, it's going to lighten it a little bit, so obviously I can play with these settings in order to get the results I'm after, or I can change it back to normal. And the reason it's working without this being on screen, again, is because we set this to use the alpha channel. Okay, so we can play with those kinds of settings there as well if we wanted to, just to kind of help separate these items and make them more kind of stand outy. Okay. We could also go in here and let's say that our wireframe is a little bit too thick in some of these areas. Alright, so if we went to, let's say, inner gears, because we were on that one, I'm just going to hide these other ones so we can focus on the one. Let's say our wireframe was too much here. I can always go to some of these channel settings or keying settings and go to matte, difference matte, no. Oh, there's matte. Matte choker. And by taking this matte choker and adjusting it, I can erode some of this. So I can change how this is looking based on these settings here. I'm going to pull this up. You can see it kind of eats it away a little bit. I could even go to blur and go to channel blur. And I can just blur the alpha channel in this to soften this as well. So lots of different things you can do to the wireframe once you even have it in here. Here's edge blur. Here's edge blur easy. There's light wrap. So I could even do, not light wrap. There's trap code. I can do stuff like shine. Not that you'd want to do shine on something like this. And see how we can use this mask as kind of like this shine thing. Or a star glow. There you go. So we can have this layer be kind of like a star glowy layer. On top of all of our other stuff. Okay, so once we're done with that, we have our animation. We have just our door. And we have all these other things kind of kicking on, showing all the different levels of our door. All right. So once we have that and we're happy with it, shrink these down so I can see the rest of my timeline. I'm going to shrink my timeline. So I put my marker holding shift at the end of this. I'm going to grab this and drag it back. And I can go to composition, trim comp to work area. Okay. It's only about a 5-6 second animation. It's not terribly long, but this is something where you could show the process of how this stuff works. Especially if this was animated, you could show each one of these things animating and moving around. Okay, and if you decide that you just don't like, the wireframe back here, maybe it's a little bit too much, maybe I can take those back gears and just knock their transparency of their wireframe down a little bit. That way they're not going to be so bright. Oops. I have to actually go to this keyframe that we have for the transparency and then take it down there to 50%. Okay, so you can play with that as well. You can even shift colors. You can do lots and lots of things. So now that we have that, I'm going to go to either File, Export, Add to Render Queue, or Composition, Add to Render Queue, or Composition, Make Movie, or hit Control-M. Click on the word Lossless. Go to my format, make it QuickTime. Go to my format options, H.264. Go to my Comp 1. And Sarcona Mech Door. So just in a few short hours, we've basically created this entire project. Okay? It isn't anything terribly advanced. It's very, very basic stuff. It's just basically getting your head around the idea of creating this stuff in a way that makes sense. Okay? And you can do other stuff too, because right now everything kind of looks like it's like right on the surface. All of these other things I could take basically, and let's say I just pre-compose this just to make it easier for now. Layer pre-compose, there it is. And we'll just call this inners. And I can take the opacity on all of these inners down so that it doesn't look like it's like overwhelming on the surface. So that everything is kind of like hidden in the surface. I could even take this and add a vignette. Oops. That's what I want to do is add. I'm adding a vignette to this. And I didn't want circle or square. Let me make this rounded. And then maybe I'll take the opacity back up on this layer and just let it rely on more of that mask to control all this. There we go. Okay, so you can see how I've kind of feathered it so that we have more of that area in the middle. I could even copy this mask into a new layer, paste it on there, subtract. Let's take the extension out. And that should be good. Let me take the opacity down. Should be good. Okay, just kind of create that the finished piece, Okay, so it's really a storytelling ability now to kind of get this stuff together to make someone understand how this door works. I could have even gone further and started dropping in these items as separate items and built this thing into multiple pieces. Okay, for this assignment, I'm not too concerned about you doing every little step that you would do along the way. I just want to create a nice piece that kind of shows here's the layers, here's a different rendering method than we previously used. Okay, and even on some of these things, like let's say this one, I'm not too happy with the purple. Okay, well this purple, if we look at it, it's just purple. Okay, I can make a new layer in here. It'll probably mess up some other stuff because it now doesn't have an alpha channel. But now I have this red being affected by that. So I'm just going to use, put this on the bottom. I'm just going to use this as an alpha matte from the previous one. So now I've just changed those pins to red. So now if we go back to the comp, now they're red instead of being the other color. All right, so there's lots of different things that you can do to kind of recolor this stuff even after the fact, or re-emphasize these things after the fact, okay? So After Effects is a great tool because you need to be able to do this kind of stuff and not just, you know, work in Maya all the time, because some of the stuff is going to be done in After Effects or in Nuke or in both or in extra programs. All right, so that's your mech door. The movie's done. So if I go to my desktop D drive, there's my mech door. Beautiful. Okay. Now I'm going to go to Window, Show Movie Properties. Just because it's a little bit flattened, the colors are flattened. I'm going to go to the Video Track, Visual Settings, change this to Blend, crank it up, change this to Straight Alpha, close it, wiggle the mouse, there we go, save it, and now it's ready to be turned in. You can see how nice this looks having finished this completely. And here we're still getting this graininess just because we're, you know, it's lower res. But now that we can see what the finished look of this thing is, it's turned out very nice. And it's something that definitely you could use to create different looks to many different kinds of animations to kind of show how things work. Okay? Especially for like instructional design, you know, how does a door work? How does this type of door actually function? Okay, and we don't have any wireframes that are crazy. The ones on the bars maybe a little bit too much. I could probably lower those, but it's nothing, you know, atrocious. All right, so that's how you do your mech door.